Hello and welcome to the SMU Video Archive Series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time at the university. I'm Pam Lange, Senior Lecturer in English, and today our guest is Sally Strange, Professor Emeritus in English. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great, yeah. Now we talked the other day to get a little background about what we would talk about, and you said that you came to SMU in 1961, and you said that the story of your hiring was very interesting.
Right.
So maybe we could talk about that.
It starts very dramatically. We had spent. I had children, son 7 and daughter 4, and my idea was I was to marry Jack Strange, who was in the psych department. And I would have 2 children, and I'd stay at home and do canning and make bread and
sewing.
make cakes
I know.
and I love to sew, still do. So, but that wore thin in about after Richard was born, when he was about 2.
Oh, really?
But I was committed, so I had Audrey, and they were lovely children. But in the summer of '60. We went to San Francisco State. Jack got a job there, and his friend came to SMU and lived in our house. We lived in his house in San
So you
Francisco.
switched off. Okay.
Switched houses. And I just fell in love with San Francisco.
Yes.
And it was the most romantic, beautiful
It is wonderful.
place I have ever been. And I came home, and I went into this, it was a real depression. I thought, I can't come back here and
Hot,
awful PTA. I had started working on a master's in philosophy and given that up, and I tried to write 2 novels, and that hadn't worked out. And I just was sitting there like that.
With these children.
With these children, and my husband, who was busy doing his important thing.
Important work.
And we had kept up socially with people in the English department. I had gone to SMU, graduated, gotten my BA, so had Jack, and of course he was back here as a teacher. And we had friends, and I got a phone call from Dr. Boyer. Dr. Boyer is a legend. He was a very fierce man.
And the English department.
English department, and he called me, and he said, we have had 2 instructors quit at this Christmas. They're not coming back in the spring. And we need somebody who can come in and teach 2 sections of freshman English. And your name was mentioned.
They always say that, don't they? Your name was mentioned.
Oh, you know, and I thought, and it just kind of, I was awestruck. So I said, well, it sounds good. So I went out to interview him, and Calvin Smith was his assistant and helping with freshman writing. And I didn't know Calvin Smith, and I knew Dr. Boyer, though I'd never had a class with him. I knew my reputation. Anyway, we met, and so he said, all right, we'll hire you. And then later, it was told to me that he said, well, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. We have hired a woman who got her BA from SMU 5 years ago, and heaven knows what's going to happen.
What's going to happen, because you didn't even have a master's degree.
I didn't have a master's.
No, nothing.
I had a BA.
BA.
And I went and taught those 2 classes, and I just fell in love with it.
You just love to teach.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Then I started. I thought, I've got to do this some more. So I enrolled in the master's program. And then the rest of it is not quite so dramatic. I hope I proved myself. But that year was the beginning of SMU's plan to try to cope with the people who were coming back. There was still an influx of the veterans even though they had, the majority of them had gone off. But the enrollment had grown. SMU had to staff these freshman courses. We didn't have that many people taking MAs. So I went through and got my MA along with a woman who was about 5 years older than I, Bobby Kamholz. and then one who's about 10 years younger than I was Kay Bethune.
Kay Bethune, and you were
And
the
the
only
three
ones,
of
and the
us.
three of you, yes.
And they had other graduate students, but we hit it off. Bobby and Kay and I, we took the same courses. We studied together. Nobody was allowed to study outside of our group.
Oh,
we
you
had
had
our
to
group
study in your group, so
And we loved teaching, and we got together and graded papers together.
did you really?
And would pass them back and forth and argue. And we were really devoted teachers, and SMU saw that.
Yeah, so you all three got...
So we were doing that, and then it suddenly occurred to the powers that be, we've got 3 coal mines here. They are women.
Yeah.
They don't have advanced degrees.
No.
We can, but we want to keep them. Because of the tenure situation, they couldn't keep us beyond 7 years without
That's
giving
right.
us tenure.
Yeah.
So they said, all right, what we'll do is have a cadre of these 3, and these 3 women will teach freshman writing
Forever.
forever.
Yeah, that's right.
And we will call them assistant professors.
Assistant professors, you were
And
tenured
that's
assistant
it.
professor.
And that's it. And you all go ahead and teach your courses and keep doing good work, but don't
Ever expect
don't
it.
expect anything else. We said, never.
Oh,
And
yes.
we were so
Thrilled.
Oh, just marvelous. So we started that, and I did that, I think, for about 2 years, and then I thought, I'd 4 classes of freshman English.
a
I
little
thought
bit
I'd
much.
like to do something aside from that. So I said, I don't know who was chair at the time, and Bobby did the same thing, and I think, and Kay.
Yeah, that you could teach some
And so
genre courses.
we taught some of the genre courses, and then things began loosening up, and also the English department about that time expanded. They brought in,
What year
I'm
was that, do
guessing
you remember?
This would be, and I was just looking
was
here,
just
I
trying to
tried to
think when it would be,
write it.
68?
It would have around 71.
71, yeah, that's
About
what I was
that time.
thinking.
That there was something like 16 young PhD candidates, assistant professors. There were like 2 or maybe 4 associates and 2 full, so that they had all of these assistant professors, and most of them taught in the freshman
Yeah,
program.
they did.
And then they would, but SMU couldn't keep that many.
No, they couldn't, and I think I started in 68, and there were some then, and then they kept coming, but they couldn't keep them all, so there was kind of a purge. It was really sad, if you remember.
There were purges.
Yeah, it was really,
And the Jacobys came.
right,
and,
that was all around
man
that
and
time.
wife, and they taught one course, or they were hired as one person, and anyway, it was very exciting. But it was bad because the axe finally fell.
It
They had
did,
to cut
and
them.
it was a kind of, if I remember, rather very unpleasant. It was
Yeah.
a time of, kind of chaotic time anyway, because SMU finally hit the 60s and the early 70s.
Yes.
And that was,
Yeah, oh God.
yeah, we had all kinds of things going on, but it was an exciting time. We had all that kind of new blood, I guess, that came in. And,
Yeah, and they were exciting. There was all kinds of gossip.
That's
They were
right.
all young people.
right,
You
there was
know,
all kinds of stuff
All
going on.
kinds of stuff going on, and it was fun, and it was intellectually stimulating.
It was. I mean, I had classes with, people who had just gotten their PhD from Harvard or somewhere, and they just taught the same classes, so they were great. And a lot of those people, most of them are not here anymore, but they were very good classes. I had a good time.
And that was the time that I learned some of the more revolutionary ones in the department says, women are not getting paid as much as
That's
men.
right. Let's talk about that.
And all right, you were probably one of those who
I
said,
was.
let's talk about that.
We did. We do. remember.
And so, people kept coming to me and saying, we've got to tell our salaries. We've got to put it all out in this. My father had always told me that wasn't a nice thing to do, to talk about money.
Talk about money.
And I knew SMU didn't like it, but there were a bunch of them. So we got together and put our salaries, and you remember what
I do
happened.
remember. Yes, we found out that all the men were making, I think it was $600 more than the women. And it wasn't much. I hate to say that I think the women's salaries were $7,400 and the men's were $8,000, but that was still very infuriating.
Well, it was a big
$600 was a
big
huge
percentage.
amount of our pathetic pay.
Yeah, it was absolutely astounding. And we also did it by where we got the degree and how many years we'd taught.
That's right.
And
We had all of that.
The men were all
no matter what, even the newest hires were
yeah.
getting more money. And that was not just true I think in the English department among the instructors, but it was true throughout the university.
Oh,
Do you
I'm
remember?
sure
I mean,
it
there
was.
was a commission on the status of women, and they found that this was true. The women were all getting less than the men, and they had to equalize the salaries. Now, I don't remember too much about that, but I remember that I know in the English department, I remember people said, "Now you don't really want to have equal pay." Yes, I do. You kidding? But don't you think you should have merit? No. We wanted equal. We wanted equal, and they did. You know, they did it. They did it. They equaled it out. So may not have lasted forever. But no, I think it has to.
I don't think it lasted for more than 2 years. I think it went back.
It's cynical. Probably, because there are ways to
it
justify that, but you know, that was just the way it is, and still women are not making as much as men across the board, but we did what we could.
Yeah, along in that line, in one of my, man directed my master's thesis, whom I dearly adored and worshiped, Pascal Covici was chairman, and I had been teaching here for 7 years, and you're supposed to get a sabbatical. I knew that, so I went to Pascal and I said, I'd like a sabbatical. And he looked at me, and he said, I don't know about that. So he said, check with me later. So I came back, and I said, what about my sabbatical? He said, let Jack take care of you. He did. He said
He did really?
He did really.
Oh.
And I said, no.
No, I know.
No way you're going to do that. Oh, it was just.
That isn't that really, but you know, that was just the time, and I don't think they just didn't understand. I mean, Pascal.
No, I don't.
A great person I dearly love too, but I've had conversations with people just truly did not understand the viewpoint of a woman who's working for herself, not as a wife and a mother, where we all started out, of course. At least I did. That was my plan. Also. So.
Well, other things, and I thought, and I don't know whether it'd be interesting or not, but I think the development of, I don't know what the course is like now, but the course.
Yeah, let's talk about the course development. When did you get involved in doing that, or had you been all along? I mean, it'd be interesting to talk about what the freshman writing class was when you first started and how it changed, because I remember a few various evolutions or revolutions.
Well, it started. Pascal, Dr. Boyer and Calvin Smith selected the texts, and they selected, and what they did is we taught composition the first semester. And then the second semester we read literature. And we read, gosh, I can't even remember what we read back in those days. But we taught just novels and short stories and things like that. They wrote about it. Yeah. And then we had an essay that they wrote in their the first semester. And we all took it on one day, and we continued this tradition. I remember when Kennedy was shot, it was, Pascal was heading freshman rhetoric that year. And everybody wrote an essay, and we had 3 topics, and everybody took it the same day, and we got them together. And we had done that, trying to keep the various sections together to where an A in one section.
Yeah, right. Okay, it would be the same. Right, which is always still a problem. So subjective. To have the.
Yeah. But we, at that time, we did not grade the papers, or we graded them, and we put a very light pencil on it and turned them over to Dr. Boyer, and Dr. Boyer and Calvin Smith read every single paper.
Oh, no. Well, I don't know. That would be too much fun.
I think there were about 700 at that time.
Oh, my gosh. How did they ever do that?
They did.
They did, yeah. They were devoted to their task.
And Dr. Boyer had a rule: if you had more than 3 misspelled words on the first page, you flunked.
No kidding.
No kidding.
And then what happened if you flunked?
Well, then you had to
That
take
was
the
it.
course over
You had to
again.
take it over again. Well, that would
He
be interesting. And then Pascal had it, and then
Well, I don't remember who had it next. But after Dr. Boyer, when I came back, he was still chairman and Calvin Smith was running it. I don't remember who took it on. But then they relaxed it a little bit, and you got to choose what text that you taught in
right,
the
you didn't have to all teach
second
the same
semester.
book. Yeah.
And then sometime along the line, and it may have been when Twinkie had the course, it may have been when Pascal, we started doing themes. Because
Oh
we
yeah,
had
and I think
a-
it must have been still Pascal or Tom had it when I started
may
to
have
teach,
been.
but that was in the early '70s. So
But did we have the thematic?
yes,
things?
we started. Love, war,
Yeah,
all of that. Yeah, yeah.
because we were writing
That was
the research paper.
right. We wrote a research paper, and that's when I started. That's what they were doing. We had. I was teaching war.
You would.
I think I was taking over someone's class, and that was their choice. I think I picked that, but it's funny how it has changed. And and then Twinkie, I think, came after that, and that was when
Yeah.
it kind of changed more to rhetoric, to argument. But
Yes,
we
to
had
rhetoric.
different kinds of things. Like we had different courses. We taught different courses, but it was more rhetorical.
Yeah.
More
and
rhetorical,
it
yeah.
was, and I really liked that. I
Yeah, I
think
think-
teaching, it enlarged what I knew about writing.
Mhm.
You know,
It did. I mean, I learned a lot
take a
doing that.
rhetorical
Taking an
stance.
argument
Yeah.
and backing it up, and that kind of thing, which has stayed pretty much more or less stayed that way since then. But it's
still-
different. It's different. It's different still. Now you also were, I know, became the director of freshman
Yeah.
writing too.
Right.
And,
Oh,
we had a very good time. We had lots of.
she's, I know what you're leading into.
Yeah.
Well, there are several things that I was thinking about before then. Pascal, when I think he was was director of freshman writing right before Twinkie, and then I came right after Twinkie.
Yeah, you were right after Twinkie, but
And
I thought Tom.
Pascal got hooked on S.I. Hayakawa.
Oh right, I don't think.
You
I-
remember?
I don't think I taught when he was there. I was maybe a student, but I wasn't teaching. I was
Really?
not teaching. I didn't teach with Pascal. It was Tom, because I did the themes. That's when I started, and that
Okay.
was
Okay.
'73.
Well, he
or
got
so.
interested in Hayakawa, and it was marvelous because the name and the thing, you know, the
Yeah, right.
flag is a symbol.
That's
a
right.
symbol is different from your country, and
That's right.
then you try to break this. Anyway, I thought that was just marvelous. And then we went into rhetoric, which I thought was marvelous. And then we had the good luck to use a text by
Yeah, right, Sheridan
Baker, who was an 18th century scholar. Anyway, I came in as director of freshman writing, and I was of mature years and had gotten sort of my bit in the teeth, and decided we ought to run this and have some, make this course something. So I got the idea of asking Sheridan Baker to come down to SMU and having a meeting in McFarland Auditorium of all the freshman classes. At one time, everybody was to be
We would
released.
come and have
And
a
we would come,
talk.
and Sheridan Baker
Would-
would regale us, and then we would go down to Waxahachie, the faculty, and
Have a retreat.
have
He
a
would come
retreat.
too.
And he would teach us.
Yes, teach us.
And we
Well,
would sit around his skirts, and he would, and we. Well, I had never been out on the stage of McFarland Auditorium, especially all by myself, and I got up there, and I was to introduce Pascal, who was to introduce Sheridan, which
Yes.
we did, and Sheridan gave a terrible talk.
it was
I
terrible.
can't even
He was-
remember.
No, I
Can
don't
you
remember too
remember?
much about it, but I do remember the retreat, however, in Waxahachie.
Right.
But Sharon, yeah, it was
But-
awful. He wasn't at all good, you know.
No,
Here
we
done
had
all
these,
that money
you know,
to
these
pay them.
18-year-olds, and we
Right.
brought him down here, and he was kind of dull and lectured like his book.
That's right. It was dull, and we were all kind of up in arms. We were going to tell him the next
So
day.
everybody was in a foul mood under Waxahachie. And the booze flowed,
Yes,
and
it
we
did.
had,
It was a different time.
it was a different time, and
It
he
was. We had a
he
good
had his
time.
girlfriend, and
Mhm.
everybody got mad.
Right. And the next day, of course, everyone had terrible, we shouldn't say this, but hangovers, but
Yeah, and we
unbelievable.
were-
And we
we
were
had
supposed to give
program.
talks. We had a program,
program.
but we could barely do it. But we did do it, and it was
We
certainly
went through
an
it.
amazing memory. Because I think, you know, at that time, it was we were all such good friends, you know, all
Yeah.
the teachers, we really cared about each other. We were friends, went to parties all the time. Seems to be kind of different now. It's become, I think maybe, like we were going to talk about the problems with, there really came to the point where there weren't going to be any more tenured assistant professors like you
Yeah.
and Sally. That it was more of
Yeah.
a buyer's market. You might talk about that a little bit, because it was really a heartbreaking situation. I know, for people in the 70s and,
Yeah,
and
well-
early 80s, there wasn't a chance, you know, for anybody
No, and
to
we
stay.
pushed. I remember going to a meeting of the H&S faculty and trying to talk to them. The English department finally just, because I was saying there's some way we've got to be able to tenure
Yeah.
people like you.
Right,
And
but-
there were a bunch of very
quite a few
few
people
very
that would have
good
liked
teachers,
to do it, you know.
and that we felt, you know, it was just like Kay and Bobby and me. Just a sad footnote: Bobby had a stroke and
Right.
then died.
Oh, she did die. Yeah. we
Yeah,
did.
and then Kay just, I think Kay got worn out.
Yeah. It's
with-
just so you know, it is hard to
Yeah,
to teach.
as she
that.
got older. And finally, I decided when I was about 57 years old is, you know, I'm not going to do this anymore.
No, it's a hard. It's
And so Jack and I bought some property out on Grapevine Lake where I'm still living, and I moved out there. But before we left, we were all trying to do something, and I remember going to this meeting, and I can remember some of the people, and they were sincere. Barbara Reagan, who was very much for women's causes,
right.
sat there and said, we don't want people with PhDs, without PhDs, getting tenure in the university. We don't like them as a part of our faculty, and it's just a very, it's a principle that they believe in, and they don't see it as
Well,
teaching, or I don't know. It's a very,
it's really it's a difficult problem, because you know and yet those instructors or lecturers, as they are called now, I know in the English department almost 70% of all the teaching. They're like a cash cow, and this is true in foreign languages too. And yet they're paid the least and have the most classes. And I think eventually the worm may turn, but I don't know. But I think it should, because this is not a plantation after all.
No, but
I mean, it is like a plantation.
Yeah, no, and I got crossways with my dear friend Marsh on several occasions about this. And we had 1,300 freshmen. I remember quite distinctly. I counted it up because it was in part of my arguments
That's a
to
huge
it.
class.
We had 1,300 freshmen. The English department had about 700 students
Altogether.
altogether. We had 26 people teaching. That was students, that were people like you, there were people, assistant professors like me, regular assistant professors.
Right, official.
But there were 26. And Marsh, when we got in one of these arguments, he says, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. But we taught more students, we had more faculty, we were bringing in more money than any of it, and we felt like we
we deserve,
I've always felt like we
well, of course I do
deserved it.
too.
Yeah.
And now they have modified to some degree where they like I have the senior lectureship, but that is more or less tenure, but you have to be reviewed every 3 years, and but you can stay. You don't have to be kicked out. So
but you don't get.
No, you don't. You still, there's still and I left for a long time. You know, after that
remember
I got
you did.
another job as the humanist in residence down at Dallas Public Library, and I loved that. And then the city went bankrupt, so they eliminated my job. But I did a lot of very interesting things outside. And after that, when I came back, you know, I love teaching. I really like it, and I'm not that young anymore, so it's okay it's okay. I went through the whole process, which is like a tenure review, and passed. So, you know, or got elevated to this august position. But it's still not right. I mean, and I still think the salaries are very unfair.
And of course, SMU is at a disadvantage in that they don't have a large graduate program, and they don't have have a PhD, so that they don't have this people to draw from.
So that's what the argument is too. That we do have, we don't have the large graduate student population, which usually staffs the freshman English programs. But that can be good. I think it's good for SMU because we have very good teachers. But it is a difficult question. I'm glad we're talking about it on the record, as we say, because I think it's something that the university is going to have to deal with eventually. I mean, the argument will be, well, there's always all these people out there that are willing to take the jobs, but you know, maybe not forever. It's not fair. It's not right. I mean, SMU has a chair of ethics and a McGuire Center of Ethics, and yet they've got an inequitable workplace. And I think the Faculty Senate right now is looking at that and seeing the difference in the salaries that we've got. But what about some of the other things? You taught not just rhetoric or English, but you said fiction. You taught in the humanities program, and it used to be that we could do that. Well, I taught, Lord knows, 18th century humanities, which meant I had to really scurry around to study.
Wasn't it wonderful?
It was great, though. I learned so much doing that.
I did the sophomore and the junior, and in fact, I was just talking to the people who are running this TV, the tapes and so forth. I worked. Ted Tucker, who was here, one of those assistant professors that came here for 7 years.
He was great. He was gone.
He was gone. He and I got a NEH grant and did a self-paced program in the humanities.
Yeah, I forgot.
And it was so much fun, and we enjoyed it. And you know, another thing, when I started thinking about this time, which I remember very well, is the people that we had teaching freshman English. I remember them. You were mentioning Sue Sheldon and Bill Barr.
Bill Barr and Marilyn Stewart and George Parabo and all of those people. We had so much fun. But we did.
Wow,
we used to go
different people.
Yeah, very different.
Marcia Boer had gotten a PhD in Old English from Berkeley.
Yeah.
She was very smart. She was not, it was hard for her to get with what we were doing.
That's true.
But she was just brilliant, and she taught 4 sections, and she'd come up with these wild, crazy ideas. She decided one day in her class, we were very strict about plagiarism, and she decided that anything that anybody heard and repeated on a paper was plagiarism.
Oh, no.
You know, you're supposed to eat all your vegetables.
That's plagiarism.
That's plagiarism because you didn't figure that out.
Somebody told you that. Mama.
Anyway, I remember getting to school one day, and I had this call from Marsh, and I went down. He said, "You know what that woman has done? She's flunked 2/3 of her class for plagiarism." And so, oh my gosh! And so I went in. I said, "Marsh, you can't do that." She says, "Well, it's not their idea. They got it from somebody." I said, "Marcia, that's not plagiarism.
That's
You're
not plagiarism. Everybody got there's no original.
What it was, and it sounds kind of screwy, but it kept ideas fermenting.
That's true. So you'd try to think of something that someone hadn't told you.
Yeah, well, no, I mean,
Which is
you're
not easy.
teaching with Marcia Bohr.
Well,
you
that's
never
true.
Thought of that.
Yeah, right. There was all kinds of things. There were all kinds of. I know you had
Yeah.
quite a time writing herd on all of us. And,
Well, the other funny thing, and I don't know it. It's sort of like you turned on a spigot. I can remember the basics test. We
oh yes,
decided-
I was going to ask you. Remind you
Twinkie
of the,
started that.
That's right, that basics test.
I
and
inherited that.
Yeah, we did that. We made them up, and we taught you had to pass that basics test. Was like that exam.
We
But at
had-
least they learned that stuff. You know, they don't really do
We
that
had-
anymore. They gotten away from that. That's when a lot of theoretical stuff where you shouldn't really worry about those mistakes. But believe me, I worry about them.
Yeah, we had 10 rules.
That's right. 10 rules,
It's-
10 questions.
Speaking of writing herd, when I took over and we made up this test, and it had to be objective.
Right.
You can't write a theme. And they had to spot the errors. They had one of them, the sentences were written out, and you had to say what the error was.
You had to correct or just
The
correct
other one,
it?
you had to put the correct.
You had to correct it, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, we always met, and I'd say, do you all approve of this test? We'd have several writings, and everybody'd work on it, and they'd get in fights, and anyway,
That's right,
it would
over
seem
there.
to work pretty well
It did, I think.
until they took the test, and before they took it, she's still here, Vicki Hill.
Yes,
a
Vicki.
marvelous person.
She
She's
went-
from Berkeley,
And she knows that grammar all right.
She knows that grammar, and she came in just, straight from Berkeley, and we're going to turn over and do the world. We're going to change the world. She came in, and we had decided. She said, "I think we ought to, unless they get, I've forgotten, 70% of these correct, they're going to flunk them."
Yeah,
They're
the
gonna
whole,
flunk
the
it.
whole class. Yeah.
Well, and then they have to take it over again, then they have to
Oh.
take it over there anyway. And so everybody, we were sitting in a classroom discussing this, and Vicki said that should be our cutoff. And I said, well, we don't know what we're going to have. What if we have 2/3 of the class?
Yeah,
that
what
don't flunk?
how are you
What
going to
do
teach them the
this?
next year?
She said, well, if they don't get it, they don't get it. And the rest of you all were
Yeah.
sitting, I know, yeah, Vicki's right, Vicki's
Oh,
right.
I might have gone by that time. Oh, dear.
Anyway, we had.
Did they
one
all flunk?
hell of
You had to
a-
really
We had about 2/3 flunked that
Really?
course.
No, I guess
And
I
I
wasn't
went down
there.
and talked to Marsh, and I said, we're going to have to give it
Again.
in 3 weeks, and then we'll see how many pass, and then we're going to have to give it another time, because
Well, it's not practical. I mean, to read every 2/3 of the class retake. It's really not.
Just
But we have our little idealist.
But it was. I think it was one of the most. I enjoyed that. One of the
Yeah,
most
I
exciting
enjoyed that. I
periods of
did
my
give the
life.
basics tests and stuff, but there was no rule that I think it was a lower grade.
Well,
that-
we
yeah,
finally.
yeah, they
They
finally
finally
loosened. Yeah,
loosened
loosened up. Well, it's of course true that they should be able to do that, but it was kind of hard to, people say, well, you're teaching to
You
the test,
can't.
you're not really doing anything else but that. It's like the TOS test. Any
Yeah.
kind of test like that, there can be problems with it, but I do remember that. And of course, we should mention something that I started with Sue Sheldon, the criteria. The Journal of Freshman
Yes.
Writing, that's where we got the
Oh,
money to
yes.
hire Sheridan Baker. Do you remember that? And that I think was,
I didn't know.
well, I'm not sure, the
Yeah.
first year, I think it was like
That was smart. Well, everybody was
and they
doing
still
things
have
like
that.
that.
They
Talk
did.
about that.
Well, we decided that it was one thing to have essays and books were written by professional writers, but it would be a lot better if we could get together the best essays of our own students and put them together. So Sue, I really lost track of her completely, but we decided, well, let's do it. So we got enough we went to, I think Tom somehow was in charge of something. We went to him and asked him for if we could do it, and he said sure, and I think we had $600. So at that time there were no computers. We collected essays from everybody in the department, all the students, as people thought they were good, and we put them together, and we got them typed. We had to bribe somebody to type it for us and put it in this, and we just and we got it printed, and we sold it. And guess what? We got a bunch of money, because all the freshmen had to buy it. And so whatever it cost, it was still a lot more than we. And so
well, we put the basics test in with that, didn't we?
Yeah, we had the basics test in
rules.
there too. We had the rules. We had all of that, and we had the different other things for, different rules and regulations about plagiarism and attendance and grading, and we had the basics rules in there too. Yeah. And we came out with it, and it's come every year since. I think that was probably about 1975 or so. I bet it was. About that time, and it was has been, and now it's a perfect bound book, big, huge, costs $10, and they still do it. Still have criteria.
Oh, that's
yes, and it's professionally typeset and all of that, and so it's a lot different. But I still have that first one. Little yellow booklet with typewriting, we didn't, but that was a wonderful thing, I think, that we started, and that SMU did support, and it's kept going ever since. So that must have been one of the good ideas that we had.
And it was also the way we financed our end of the year party.
That's right, we had those nice
somebody
parties.
Found out about that and didn't much like it.
No,
it was something fraudulent.
Well, but I think we didn't have that much money, but it was better than nothing. And of course, I think I don't. What happens to the money now? But,
I don't know. They paid $2.50 or $1.50 or something.
Yeah, it wasn't too much. Maybe I don't know. I really don't remember. Maybe even $1. But whatever it was, we sold, say, 1,200 of them or 1,300, and so we had more than the 500 that we paid to get it done. So that was our first entrepreneur job, but it was a lot. It was fun, back then. And of course, it's the university has changed quite a bit, but I think we still have that same setup with the freshman writing program taking up so much of the paying for so much for the English department, and we getting so little. But we'll hope that maybe that will change someday. Do you remember anything else about the university? You were a faculty wife, and which I don't mean to put it in that way, but you had a little different position from people that didn't, and Jack was in the psychology department.
Right.
And any different changes in they'd always have these 20-year plans or 5-year plans, changing things, and different presidents coming, and
Well, I don't know. It seems to me, as we look back on it, that I was in one fight after the other.
Well, I guess I was too.
Yeah, well, I guess that's maybe what life is out there, more zone. When President Hardin, and I called Marsh because I couldn't remember the dates, was here from 72 to 74.
Oh, 73 to 7, Paul Hardin.
72.
Yeah. 72.
And they brought him in, and somebody called me, and I don't know what was going on politically, and asked me to head up his inauguration committee.
That's really strange.
Well, I knew nothing about inauguration.
Well,
I never had been in on commencement. And they said, don't worry about it.
It's easy.
It's easy. Keith Baker will help you.
Oh,
Keith
good.
Baker was vice president of public relations, and he was just a living doll. And he really told me what to do.
He told you what to do, so you.
But we met up in the president's suite in the big boardroom.
Yeah.
And they had people like Schubert Ogden from theology school and Joe McKnight from law school, and they had all these big wigs. And they were sitting around and we were planning. And I can remember, because I was just kind of sitting there.
Yeah, what am I going to
keep up with all of this? And I remember Schubert Ogden he said, we've got to do something about the mace. Willis Tate had carried, and I think it had been since the inception of the university, a big black club. It had a big ball here, and then it was straight, and another ball in here. And then there were it was painted black, and there were jewels around, big pieces
real or
of glass around.
Glass jewels.
And it was the Senate, the head of the Senate, president of the Senate, had to carry this like this in front of the president as for any ceremony. And so Schubert Ogden, I'm sure they put him on the committee because he said, I'm tired of that mace.
Get rid of
He
it.
can't get rid of it. So they said, okay, you're going to be on the committee. And he said, a mace is supposed to be like a wand. And he delivered a lecture to us for about 30 minutes on the origin and the evolution of maces and what they have meant through the
How
years.
interesting, yeah.
So he had one, and we got an artist, and we sculpted this lovely kind of pale wood thing. So that took care of the mace, which I didn't know was going to be any problem. Of course, the other problem was who do you invite, and where should they sit, and all of this
Right, who
protocol.
should be, all of that sort of thing.
And then the other sticky problem was television. And Joe McKnight said, this is a solemn ceremony. We are not going to have it televised.
No television.
No television. This is our ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And other people wanted it. But anyway, we decided not to do it. Well, we got through that, and I think everything seemed to go well. And then Paul Hardin called me in, and he said, you seem to run that so well. I want a committee, an EEOC committee, and I want you to head it up. So I said, sure.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, that's just up your alley, right?
It
is.
Yeah, it was horrible things that were going on, especially with the janitors and the kitchen help and things like that I knew about. So he named other people to the committee, and there were Chicanos, and there were blacks, as we called them then, Afro-Americans, Chicanos, and a few white people. And anyway, we assembled this committee, and I was met with such hostility from the blacks. And I remember one woman that says, you're just on here as a figurehead, and you're not going to pay any attention to us. And I said, you want to bet?
Oh, good for you, yeah. Because that wasn't really I remember it being a very terrible situation.
It was a terrible situation. So we started working with things and making plans, and I was going to take them to Hardin. And then somebody came up, and I'm just going to tell it like it was.
Yeah.
The thing that shocked me, Lawyers Inn had rooms for men only. On this, to come stay. These were students, people who came to lecture.
Right.
No women.
No
just
women. No. Well,
they had rooms, but they were all for
women.
men.
Yeah.
They were all for men. And I said, I think that's an absolute disgrace. So I thought, there's no point in waiting to talk to Dr. Hardin about this, President Hardin. I just write.
You wrote a letter.
Wrote a letter to Charlie Galvin. Dean Galvin, and said that this was, very insulting to the women, outrageous and so forth. And this was about in March, and I got a note from Hardin, and he says, I think I want to have your committee convene in my office for a breakfast luncheon on the 3rd of April.
Oh, really?
And we went in there, and he could hardly contain himself.
He was mad.
He was mad, and he said, this committee
is disbanded.
Really?
And
that was the end of that committee.
Isn't that too
And
much?
I learned a lesson.
Well.
But I couldn't have done it any other way.
No. I mean, I remember, we were talking the other day, and I remember writing letters to Dean Early about cases of sexual harassment I knew about. And I was the president of the Women's Faculty Caucus, and I didn't have tenure. I never would get it. I knew that, but I was not going to let that go by, and I got a lot of trouble for that. People were really furious with me because I spoke out about this, but I knew it was happening. I couldn't, and I feel
that was,
glad that I did that. It never did do any good, but at least it was out in the open.
No, there was Ellen Dickstein over in psychology.
Yeah, right. And
was harassed by her senior professor, who's still here.
Yeah.
And there was he went around harassing his students and
well,
any
there
other
was a lot of that going on at that time, even in the English department. But it was unfortunate. I mean, I think that has pretty much stopped, we hope, but it was not great at that time. I mean, I can remember, and I was appalled.
You think it was worse at that time?
Oh, yes. I don't think people would do it anymore. I think there would be
Well, that's
you know,
good.
because it's really, there's lots, we have lectures on, you know, nobody, I don't think they would do it. They're really much better. That has changed.
Yeah,
But
well,
I do remember when it was happening,
Yeah,
and
well, Ellen
especially
got-
with the teacher-student problems,
Yeah.
but, you know, or in professors too. And it's,
Oh, yeah,
you
well,
know,
I remember that in English, too.
yeah, in English, right, exactly. And that has changed. And in fact, one of the people I know that was very prone to it left, and he was fired from Princeton.
Yeah,
But he, for that, but you know, it's changed. You can't do that anymore. There's very strict
Oh,
rules. They
that's
have new
good.
rules and things, and they're pretty, basically, you know,
Well.
I really think that has changed mercifully. But you know, it's interesting to know that that used to be very commonplace, you know, especially with the, you know, with the, well, I guess, senior professors,
yeah.
people looking to get tenure, and also with teachers and students, you know, that there was lots of hanky-panky, as we say, going on. But
Yeah.
I think that mercifully has changed from what it was. But, you know, not everything. But, you know, and I think when you look back at your career and you know that you've stood up for what you believe in, that's a good feeling, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And so I know since you've retired, you've done a lot more writing, and you at one point were making dresses with wheat peel from Guatemala. I mean, you have done a lot of different
done
things
a
like
lot.
I have. Yeah. Tell us a
No.
little bit about your writing now.
Okay, well, I started this, when I was at SMU as an undergraduate. I took Dr. Bond's creative writing course, and then wrote a couple of stories and sent them to Southwest Review.
Oh yeah, good luck.
And Margaret didn't take them. And when I was cleaning out my files, I found those two stories, and when I was retiring and cleaning out my files in my office, and I sat down and read them, and they were pretty good. So but I moved out to the lake, and I became a gardener, a full-time gardener, and raised cats.
Your kitties,
and
yeah.
I was doing that, and then I was still interested in writing, and I went to a meeting at San Angelo, and a conference on writing, and met Clay Reynolds there, who was at UNT.
That's right.
And I got interested, and then I started writing, and I got interested in taking a course. I went up and took a course with Clay in the short story, and then at the master's level in the spring, I took the novel. And I really enjoyed it thoroughly. And he had a good group of students.
A good teacher.
He was a good
He's a good
teacher, and he had a
teacher.
good
Smart.
group of students. And we started, in fact, our group, we met for about, I guess, 6 or 7 years.
Really?
After
You
that class.
kept meeting.
Yeah, and then it finally disbanded,
Right.
as those will do. But after I did that, they called and asked if I'd teach I had a few things published, and they asked if I'd teach a course in creative writing.
Hey.
And I taught.
Well, good. How'd you like that?
It was more fun than anything, but I got better reviews than I ever got in my
Really?
life. They were just fantastic.
Like stellar.
And so, yeah, just stellar. But I decided I'd done it, and I didn't want to do it anymore.
Because
So-
you really, I think if you're teaching, you know, I know I do a lot of writing poetry and stuff, and if I'm teaching now, I really don't do it because I'm giving everything I have to the students.
Yeah.
Which is
No,
a good
I
reason to
don't think
retire.
you can. Yes.
You'll have time to
Yeah.
work on what you want to do.
Yeah. So
But you're still writing. I know you have a story in the Texas short story collection that
yeah,
Billy
I've
Bob
had the
Hill.
last two, and
And two.
yeah,
And
and
I've
I've
enjoyed
had-
reading those
yeah.
stories.
So, and it's fun, and it's very cathartic. If something starts bothering me, I'll write a story about it.
You write a
and it
story
helps.
about it.
Or if it's funny.
Yeah, and you said you're using a lot of your family history
Yeah.
too in your stories.
Yeah, I
that,
did. In fact, one collection is called Papa's Stories
Your father. Yeah.
that I really liked, and I sent it to Judy Alter.
Oh, you did.
Yeah,
Did she
and
like?
she said they were nice, but she says, Sally, I'm just going to tell you, if you're not you know, right up there publishing, nobody's going to want to buy a
Yeah.
memoir of your
Oh,
father.
maybe not. Yeah, of your father's
So,
stories,
I
but
just said that.
maybe it's good. It's good to have done that, and it,
Yeah.
you know, I think I'm of two minds. It may be true. I've worked with a lot of people that wrote their, you know, memoirs or written family stories and stuff. But and I guess they'll say, well, nobody wants to buy them. But I think I love to read them. You know, I really do.
This is really
Yeah.
good.
don't you?
So I
You're-
don't know what I'm going to do. But
Yeah, but you're keeping
may
on,
go.
keeping on there.
Yeah.
Always full of
you know,
lots of things to do. Well, looking back, I guess on your career at SMU, what would be the highlight, if you could think of one thing that was the best thing that ever?
I think it was that 4 years in that rhetoric program.
When you were
I think I
running the
enjoyed
rhetoric
that
program.
more
Yeah.
than anything.
Well,
it was
you were good at it.
it was exciting.
And getting to meet, to do all that, and kind of, as we said, writing herd on all these very different personalities.
I had this big office.
You did.
Remember my big office?
You had a palatial office. That's now
Gosh,
the
I
like
had a
the
bigger
dean's
office than
bigger office
than the chairman of the department.
That's right. He's got a kind of puny office.
Yeah,
He's
it's
got a
huge.
He had that huge office with the windows,
Yeah.
and carpet.
Oh,
and, well,
geez.
you were very, very
Yeah, it was
good at
fun.
that, and we had a wonderful
Yeah,
time.
I
You're
thought
the
we
one
did.
that I worked for, I guess, the most. And I
Yeah.
think the thing we appreciated the most is that you would stand up for us and back
Yeah,
us up.
well,
and,
it was-
and you had standards,
I
and you
believe
were,
it.
you know, you did believe in
Yeah.
your teachers and the students, and we tried our. I mean, I think people appreciate that, and I think that's been the case. You know, while I worked for you and Tom and Twinkie, and now, Tim and Carolyn, Tim Crucius and Carolyn Channel when I first came back, and then Joe Goyne ever since. And they've all, you know, I think there's a real skill to doing that job fairly, to hire good people and support them, and I think that's a good thing. So we'll look for better. Maybe there'll be some better. I don't know. I'm getting kind of old to keep fighting, but you know, I got on the faculty senate this year, and already I'm, you know,
Really?
oh yeah. But I mean and they were doing a salary review of all the people from assistant professor up, but they left out the lecturers. We said, excuse me, how about putting us in there? They were comparing them to all the different colleges. You know, they have colleges they want to be like, and so they were not happy that SMU salaries were lower. I said, but a couple of other lecturers that were on the faculty senate said, hey, wait a minute, what about the lecturers? So you never know. Now they're putting us in too, so that's a start.
good.
Maybe I
Yeah.
haven't quite given up yet. Not yet. Well, it's been great.
Well, I've enjoyed
yeah,
it.
this has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it, and we probably have said as much as we should.
Maybe a little bit
too much,
more.
maybe a little more. But this will be a good one. We'll have this
Okay.
one under lock and key. Well,
All
thanks
right.
so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for
It's been
asking
great.
me.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it.